topics and opinions expressed on the following show are solely those of the hosts and their guests and not those of W4WN Radio, its employees, or affiliates. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to W4WN Radio, its employees, or affiliates. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for choosing W4WN Radio.
This is Beyond Confidence with your host, Divya Parekh. Do you want to live a more fulfilling life? Do you want to live your legacy and achieve your personal, professional, and financial goals? Well, coming up on Divya Parekh's Beyond Confidence, you will hear real stories of leaders, entrepreneurs, and achievers who have stepped into discomfort, shattered their status quo, and are living the life they want. You will learn how relationships are the key to achieving your aspirations and financial goals. Moving your career or business forward does not have to happen at the expense of your personal or family life, or vice versa. Learn more at www.divyaparekh.com, and you can connect with Divya at contact@divyaparekh.com. This is Beyond Confidence, and now here's your host, Divya Parekh.
Good morning, listeners, and it's Tuesday morning. Just great to be here with y'all. Some very interesting thing happened yesterday. One of my clients came to me and said, I'm doing everything that I can, every right thing that I can think of, and yet I'm stuck because I've got Slack messages coming in, I've got executives telling me this. So she is a chief customer officer, and her peers are telling, and she's getting a lot of different demands. And also, along with being a chief success officer for customers, she is also heading AI adoption for one of the pretty big companies. And as we were talking, she's like, okay, there's so much. What could we do? So I said, how about let me just pull up one of the frameworks that I talk about. And we use the impact feasibility grid. And lo and behold, within our whole session, she was absolutely clear. So if you are stuck on how to implement different things, especially AI adoption, then the AI agency is for you. So if you have not got the book, get it and reach out to me, and I'll be happy to support you. So without further ado, let's bring in our guest and welcome, Kurt.
Great. Hi, Divya. Nice to be with you today.
Great to have you. So Kurt brings over 35 years of experience in healthcare leadership and executive search. And he and his partner, Neill, have partnered with hospital associations, physicians organization, and healthcare systems. So they have done a lot of work with executives, and that's where we will be diving in today. So Kurt, tell me, how is it that you got into this field?
Well, the executive field, I've been in healthcare for, 30 years or so, starting in the physician recruitment arena and then transitioning 5 years ago into the executive search arena. It was really a background in my family. A lot of people were in healthcare, and as I advanced in my career, I always thought it was that the health of our nation is very important. I remember my grandmother told me one little quote one time. She said, in your life, Kurt, money is honey, but health is wealth. And I think the health of our nation is very important right now. And we can't be a strong nation without being a healthy nation. So that's how I got into the executive search arena, finding healthcare at HealthSearch Partners, finding healthcare leaders that make a difference. And really the key for us as a company is very different. Divya, we look at not only when we place that candidate and the contract signed, we believe at HealthSearch Partners that our job's only half done. A good search is only good if the candidate we recruit for that facility succeeds. And that's where the 90-day series came out of.
Absolutely. And before you got into this field, were you in healthcare career yourself?
No, I wasn't. I was in retail, and for about 15, 16 years with the gap years ago. When I got out of college, that was my first job, and got into leadership, and then was promoted up the ranks. And like I said, when I got to a certain point when retail was sort of dying out and web shopping was coming on, I thought it's time to change careers. And like I said, 30 years ago, I got into healthcare and healthcare search, and that's kind of my career to date.
Absolutely. And along the ways, you have worked with a lot of different executives. You have interviewed different executives. So in your series, you talk a lot about symbolic acts. What are some examples that have stood out for you?
Well, that's a great question. A symbolic act we always look at in the first 90 days is very important because it sets the stage for your legacy as a leader. And it's really all started when Neill and I, as we mentioned before, we've interviewed over 10,000 candidates in our careers. And we were talking to a gentleman named Richard Parks, and he's headed up a large system in West Texas in Lubbock. And he had just transitioned and moved to this new job. And we were interviewing him, and this wasn't the point of the interview, but he started telling us, he said, we said, anything you do in the first 90 days? And he said, yes. He said, I move into the hospital. And Neill and I looked at each other and we said, oh yeah, okay, we all work hard, everything. He said, no. I move into the hospital. And we were like, okay, we have to dig deeper here. So explain that further. And Richard said, well, my wife stays at home, gets the kids ready to move, gets the house sold, and I move into the hospital. And Covenant in Lubbock is a large medical system, and large hospitals in America have resident lounges. He moved into the resident lounge for the first 90 days of his job. So he was there with the on-site residents and living with them, eating with them, sleeping with them. So it was a great story. And to take that one step further, that symbolic act that he had, his first night there, he woke up and one of the residents said, "Who are you?" And he said, "Oh, well, I'm the new CEO." And as people my age do, he looked at him. He said, "How'd you guys sleep?" And one of the doctors said, "Horribly. These mattresses they're just the worst thing." And he said, "I can fix that." And so he called the materials manager. He got a PO, and he said, "We got 5 trucks, and we're heading to Costco. We're going to get all these new mattresses." So they went there, got the new mattresses, installed them the same day. And for the rest of his career, his legacy, he was remembered as what he did that day, that symbolic act of changing all those resident mattresses so they could be fresh when they do their rounds and take care of their patients. And he was remembered for that. And that's how the whole series, we weren't looking for it. We were sort of rock hunting. We found gold. And that's how this whole started.
And it's when you tell about that story, so think about it. These residents are serving patients, and
Absolutely.
whatever time they get to sleep, because it's a tough time during those years. They barely get to sleep. They're on their feet. It is building that trust and fostering that relationship. My CEO cares for me.
Right. And Divya, I think the most important thing that our leaders, when they come to us and ask us, in that first 90 days, people aren't expecting you to be right all the time. They're not expecting you to be a genius. They're expecting to trust you. And that's the time to build trust in that first 90 days.
Yeah. Do you know of any other stories?
Sure. We had one gentleman, Jim Decker, and he wrote a great book. It's if our listeners would like to look at it. It's called Reviving the Heart of Leadership. And he was a CEO. And he said, one of my chief things that I use when I come in is I use the 25-50-25 rule. And I said, okay, what's that? I have no idea. He said, Kurt, I sort of made it up as I went along. And, he was a storyteller as I'm a storyteller. And he said, Kurt, when you come in, 25% of the people are on your side right away because you're in charge if you're a CEO. He said, 25% aren't. He said, and they probably won't be. And not that you don't pay attention to them, but he said 50% of them are in the middle. He said, what I did was I won the middle. And he did that in a variety of different ways. Listening to them, meeting with them in that first 90 days, listening first and acting later. And I always say, in the first 90 days, act quickly to learn, but move deliberately to make changes. Because again, we almost say, Divya, in the first 90 days, it's better to do nothing than make the wrong move and hurt your legacy and hurt that trust that you're trying to develop during that time.
Hmm. So many times, what happens is when leaders, especially executives, when they're stepping into the role, they have this desire to establish themselves and establish that, like, oh, yeah, I'm bringing value over here. So you hired me, here's where
Right.
I'm going. So sometimes they do get in a rush. And what are some pitfalls of doing that?
Well, that's one CEO we work with. Um, there was pressure from day one from the board, and this happens. And if I can just take a step back to Divya, what we're talking about is we're healthcare centric, but these leadership tactics can be applied across the board to any industry. So,
Hmm.
but he was not pressured, but the board said one of your first priorities is establish our new strategic plan. And in a lot of cases, to answer your question, a lot of times a CEO will concentrate on that and establish a new strategic plan without really understanding the culture of the hospital, understanding there's problems and how those problems were developed before they try to solve them. And you have to earn that right to either change culture or change those problems. But he said, okay, I understand. And like week 2, they were asking about the strategic plan. He said, I still have some interviews to do. And he was walking around the hospital. He was doing rounds late at night. And I came across a nursing station. And this young nurse came up to him and said, are you our new CEO? He says, yes, I am. He says, I heard you're putting together our new strategic plan. He says, yeah, it's one of the tasks I've been charged with. And she said, may I make a suggestion? He said, sure. He said, we don't need a new strategic plan. She said, we need IV pumps that work to get our patients well quicker and get them out of the hospital. So he took a step back, talked to the board, and they said, you're right. He made that symbolic act that first day. He didn't move quickly to make a change right away, to change the strategic plan. He looked at it from a standpoint, this is a symbolic act that I can make. He made it, changed it one day, fixed it, and he was remembered for the rest of his career on it. And I think what's also kind of unique, Jim Decker, the same person I was talking about, he wanted to make an impression his first day. So he came in, I think there was a Dunkin' Donuts that just opened. So his first big board meeting or his staff meeting, he brought in donuts, and everybody kind of looked at him and picked at him, and he thought, what's going on? And luckily he had one of those people that was on his side, that 25%. And he said, what I do? And he goes, we've used the same baker for the last 25 years. In fact, the baker was a sponsor of the hospital. So he owned up and said, I made a mistake, and went to the baker and told him what happened. The next meeting, the baker said, you need to get this type of donut for this person. He had it all fixed. So owned up to it, said, really misread that. And it was a small thing, but in some way, Divya, it was like, you're not listening to us. You don't know us yet. And he said, I learned a big lesson from that.
Yeah, no, definitely. So let's say there are executives out there, and sometimes they've just had maybe, one experience of running one company, or they may be stepping into the new role as a CEO. So can you outline what are general expectations at the C-suite level?
Well, obviously they're expecting you to make decisions in that first 90 days, which I think is important. But I think a CEO that treats their first 90 days like a diagnosis and not a prescription has been successful. And that's listening, learning, building trust, also making sure that you understand that you're on stage at all times. My father he had a lot of words of wisdom growing up, as fathers do. But he told me one time, he said, Kurt, just remember this, when you're going through your career and your life, he said, it's hard to talk your way out of something you behave yourself into. And I always carried that the rest of my life. And some of our CEOs say, what would be my first move? I said, just watch how you're being perceived. Make sure that your audio matches your visual.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that's such a profound statement that your father gave, and anybody can take that and run with it. So as you talk about that the expectations are to make decisions now, but contrary to making decisions, sometimes they need to get the buy-in of people. Sometimes They need to understand the culture. Sometimes they need to know who are the stakeholders, where the chips lie, what's the landscape looking like. So, given all of that, what are some of the strategies that you have seen that have worked for the leaders in the first 30 days, 60 days, 90 days?
Well, Jay Robinson was a CEO at Kaiser in Northern California. And when we interviewed him, we asked him the same thing, first 90 days, and he came up with a really unique plan. He met with all 242 of his people that he worked with. And I don't want to say subordinates, but just coworkers. And what thing was unique about it, he didn't meet them in his office. He went to their office, whether it was a maintenance worker, whether it was cafeteria, whether it was nursing, he went to their office. But most importantly, when he met with them, he sat down and said, listen, if we're successful in this first 90 days, what is it going to look like? How are we going to know that we're successful? And took their input and put all that together and came up with a plan of what he was going to try to accomplish the first 90 days. Symbolic acts, things that need to change in right away. But it meant a lot to them and said, I care about you. I'm coming to your office. You don't have to come to mine. And I want your opinion. And we're going to put it all together. And my decisions are going to be made on what you've told me, what the lay of the land is, what's the morale like here, what's the culture like, what are the immediate problems that need to be fixed, this week. So I always like that. We've had other leaders that one CEO pulled up to the hospital and his parking spot, Divya, was right next to the hospital. And he looked at it and it was executive parking for all the leaders. And he went to his first meeting and he sat down. He said, what's our number one priority? And when somebody popped up and said, our people, and he said, exactly. He said, you know what we're going to do from now on? And they said, what? And he says, we're going to take the executive parking and we're going to give it to the employees as a month. And we're going to park at the farthest end of the parking lot. And as we walk in the morning, we're going to meet and greet people and get to know them. That's going to be our way to show them that we understand how important they are to the success of our organization.
Very profound. And you talk about the criticality. So why do we say that those 90 days are critical to a CEO's success?
Well, it lays the foundation of your whole legacy. Like I said, people are looking, they're looking to trust you. You're looking to establish trust. And like I said, a lot of things you do in those first 90 days, like for example, culture is really the multiplier. And people say, what are you talking about? And I say, well, it's sometimes misreading it is 10 times negative to what you're trying to do. You could have 10 symbolic acts that everybody loved, but misreading the culture and it wipes it all out. So it's very important to understand that first 90 days before you earn the right or that earned authority to change the culture. You have to understand it. You can only understand it by getting to know the people you work with, and not just the people within your organization. Hospitals are supported by many people in the community, many supporters, many foundation people, getting to know them first in that first 90 days, because that first 90 days, like I said, people aren't expecting you to be a genius or do the right thing all the time, be perfect. They're expecting to trust you. And that's how you build trust. And that first 90 days is key.
And I really like what you mentioned about earning the right to change the culture, because you have proven yourself, you have built the trust. Now, that said, the lending cannot be perfect at all times.
Right.
What would happen if, let's say, in the first 30 days or 60 days or even later down the road, they take a nosedive? They make mistakes. People are human beings. How can they recover from that?
Well, first of all, own up to the mistake. That's very important. Admit it. It happened. Apologize for it, and most importantly, make sure you're not disingenuous about that apology, because people are looking at you, they're looking at your behavior, and then find out how you're going to correct it. And like I said, own up to it. Mention you made a mistake. Share it with everybody. The people that you work with. If it was a mistake with a group, let them know. Let the board know. Be transparent about it, and move on. Say, my father used to say a lot of things like I mentioned, but he said, Kurt, you never lose, you learn. Learn from it and move on.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And here's the thing, that by doing that, they're also exhibiting that leaders can fail, and it's okay to fail, and they're also setting that role model example as to that, okay, if you've made a mistake, what is it that you can do? How can you have a comeback from that.
It's really important.
Absolutely. It's so important.
We had a CEO that moved into his new career, and there was a tension point with one of the coworkers he was working with, and it started right away. And within that first 90 days, he let that person go, and it was probably the right move when you look back on it. But little did he know, somebody came up to him and said, it's your job to hire and fire, let people go. He said, but the gentleman he let go was one of the most popular and influential people in that hospital. So the move was right. Timing was wrong. We should have waited, got counsel. I mean, eventually the person had to go, but it's one of those things where, again, the move was right. He did everything right, but the timing was wrong. And it's hard to understand first, like I said, and when people say first 90 days, let's move, you're not slowing down. You're just sequencing your speed. You got to take things in stride. You can't accomplish everything that first 90 days, but you can lose trust and confidence in that first 90 days. That's why we stress the importance of it.
Absolutely. So now coming from the board perspective, the board is looking for executives who can make the hospitals viable, because yes, hospitals are there to serve, but at the same token, that sustainability and profitability does come into play. So given from that perspective, what are they looking for in a candidate?
Well, they're looking to somebody that fits their required needs, and that could be certifications, certain past experience, and then desired would be personality traits. But most importantly, they're looking for somebody that's open to accepting this new opportunity. There's a great book out there, Divya. I think we talked about it maybe in our pre-call, but it's called "What Got You Here Won't Get You There" by Marshall Goldsmith. And they're looking at somebody to come in and say, I have the job, I'm in charge. They're looking for somebody to come in and say, I was successful in my last job, but as the board, help me to be successful in this job. And we always caution boards to help their new CEOs succeed by looking at it from a standpoint, not necessarily like a 90-day plan, but looking at it strategically. What strategically has to be done? And also, if there's any really important decisions to make, like we had a situation where a gentleman was coming into an opportunity and the nurses' salaries were low and they had to be changed. And it was going to affect a lot of different people. It's a big payroll item, but he pre-negotiated his position on that and said, you make the change before I get there. So I'm not the bad guy. And the board said, we get that now. So they had to make that change. So they did it beforehand, which I think was a really smart move to set him up for success. And we always we always advise our new CEOs to negotiate your first win prior to you getting there, prior to you actually accepting the role. And I think that helps them step over, so they're not hitting the landmines at day one.
Absolutely. And that's such a powerful thing to have under your toolkit, because if you're negotiating your win, then you've already formed that foundation where you're walking in with an achievement. So as you're searching, how do you look out for the CEOs as well as look out for the board? Because it's a two-edged double-edged sword, if you were to say, right? Like you got to satisfy the board, so they are going to bring you back in again. And at the same time, you got to support your CEO so that they succeed and then they can refer you. So, I mean, that's referral part is just one thing, but it's the key thing is like, as you're building that reputation, which you have done for 30 years, how do you balance those two?
Well, I think most importantly, when a candidate starts, our job is not done. It's only half done, as I mentioned earlier. And our job is to make sure that candidate succeeds. So we develop a internal plan for them to succeed in that first 90 days and share it with the board and make sure that they're both in sync and both are on the same page, as opposed to having somebody coming in and say, well, give me 90 days and I'll tell you what I've learned. well, let's develop a plan from day one, understand what you're coming into, what's your expectations, and at the same time, making sure that our candidate knows everything good and bad about this opportunity going in. One of the big things now with the internet, everybody's going to know if you're going to get a new opportunity, what your company is. There's information about the company. There's information from people that work for that company. So we share that with our board and our candidates to make sure that they understand what we know, what the public knows. So there's no surprises. Transparency is really key during that first 90 days.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned that you have a plan that you share, like an internal plan for 90 days. What are some success strategies from it?
Well, I think, like I said, listening first, getting to know everybody that you work with. Also, just understanding, the facility that you're in, understanding the financial situation of what you're walking into. As you said, boards or hospitals run on very thin margins nowadays, and it's very important to make sure that you surround yourself with people. I know that one CEO we work with said, he understood the workings of the hospital financially, but he really wanted to meet with the CFO first, because that's the person that the CFO is a very powerful position at that hospital. So he spent a lot of time with him. He said, when I dug in, he said, I really found out a lot about it. He said, all the telltale signs were there in the financial part of the hospital. And I knew that, and that affected every decision I made going forward. And any feedback I had to the board was really directed through that support that CFO gave him. So again, understanding that the monetary situation in the hospital was key, he went to the right person and surrounded himself with people that helped him make those decisions.
Absolutely. And so how do you go about in your searches?
Meaning, I'm sorry.
How do you go about searching your C-suite leaders?
Well, it really depends. Depends on where part of the country is. We don't have a static list, but we have a list of people. If, say, for example, if we accept a CEO position, we're going to contact everybody within that state that's a CEO within that arena, and then see what the interests we have, and then move out 2 or 3 states away, then move out 2 or 3 states away from that, and then the search eventually goes nationwide. We feature it on our website. We have internal sourcing for it. We send out a position description to prospective candidates that we've talked to in the past. And again, we don't start from scratch, Divya, but we don't start from a static list either. We have people that we know. And then we also know we know the people that show up every time, and that doesn't mean we don't talk to them, but we're aware of them, look at their backgrounds. And most importantly, when we're first interviewing these candidates, we want to know how many times they've moved in their career, because a healthcare CEO has probably moved maybe 2 or 3 times in their career. So if we have somebody 4 or 5, that doesn't mean we don't work with them that's moved 4 or 5 times, but we want to find out why, what happened. Could be the hospital closed, it could be the system was changing, but we want to know their past track record. And then what we do is we narrow it down to, say, 8 candidates that we'll either present to the search committee, if there's a search committee, or the board, if the board's in charge of that. And then from that, we'll narrow it down to, probably after we present all 8 of them, we'll get the board feedback, narrow it down to 2, maybe 3 that are our finalists. And then they usually do, at that time, they've done Zoom meetings. We've gotten feedback. At that time, they'll do a face-to-face with those 3. And then we're usually there, making sure that we understand how the interview goes, and we're there taking notes and feedback. And then the search committee and or the board will make that selection. So the process could be anywhere from 4 to 6 months, just depending on the criteria. Time of the year is very important also. And we set out, one of the key things that a lot of our clients like, is we set out a complete time frame with dates, solid dates, so the search doesn't get out of hand. And we gain commitment from the people that are making a decision, making sure that they're accountable, we're accountable. So we have a complete timeline from day 1 to estimated fill date, and we follow that to as much as we can, depending on holidays, depending on vacations, things like that. We follow that almost to the letter, and that helps us succeed. And the idea is not to get the search done as quick as possible, but get the right candidate in there in a good time frame, and at the same time making sure that everybody's on board when we make those decisions.
Yeah, no, sounds like such a well thought out and systematic search where you're putting in a lot of effort. You mentioned about the time of the year is critical. How does that play into it?
Well, it just time of year. It's the seasons. People look. A lot of moves are made in the spring, which is right now, because people are saying, if I'm going to make a move, or I'm going to make a career change. It's May. School, depending on what part of the country, school's wrapping up. I want to have my children start, in the fall at a new school. I want to have that done. We've taken on searches in November, and they're fine, but first you have, Thanksgiving holiday, you have Christmas holiday, you have New Year's. So those are just really tough. So, and not that we don't take those on. And then part of the year, people always look at it and say, boy, our hospital sure shows great in the spring and the summer. In the winter, not so much. So a lot of people look at the seasonality of it also and say, when people are coming to relocate from across the country, they want to make sure their town or their city that they're recruiting into looks the best that it can, puts its best foot forward.
Absolutely. And you also mentioned about that you definitely want to know the background about if a CEO has moved a few times. So the reasoning is the staying power. And how does the staying power play into the success of a CEO's role?
Well, I think people look at him or her as being stable. We counsel our CEOs to make 2-3 career moves in their life. Stability is very important. Moving for the right reason, making sure they're moving from a smaller hospital to a larger hospital, or to a larger hospital within a system. We can show growth. We can show strategic leadership. We can show strategic advancement to that client, so that their aspirations and why they moved. And then I think also the key is to make sure that one thing we always ask our candidates, assuming, let's say, for example, Los Angeles, assuming that you're offered the position, we always do background checks, but we always ask the candidate up front, you get there 6 months from now, there's a story in the LA Times about you. Is something going to show about that? Because again, everything we know, internet travels everywhere. Is something going to show up? We ask them up front. Is there anything, not necessarily hidden in your closet, but anything we need to be aware of? So I remember one candidate was very upfront with me about lobbying heavily for a position for his certain specialty that he was a lobbyist for on the side, and it was really, the candidate loved it, but he let us know that. So he said, you're going to see my name in the paper. So we asked him that also.
Yeah, no, that definitely makes sense, because you're asking for full transparency, and then transparency allows you to help them build narratives around their background. So what are some of the narrative building essentials?
When you say, I'm sorry, ask that again.
Like narrative. So for example, we're not going to have anybody with a picture perfect life. Everybody's going to have something in the closet, not necessarily bad skeletons, but there are skeletons in the closets. There are downfalls, there are ups and downs, highs and lows in people's lives. So how do you build narratives around that, so that way you're still being transparent, and yet?
Yeah, I think it's very important. We use obviously we ask for references, and from people that obviously we'll ask for references, and our candidates will give us those. And at the same time, sometimes we'll ask that reference, is there anybody else that we could talk to that has worked with this candidate that maybe the candidate didn't give us? And we're not trying to find anything negative. We want to try to cover the all the information about this candidate. Also, we always ask the references, tell us about your working relationship with them. How did you like them? But we always say, if there's one thing that could change, what would that be? And a lot of times there's the same narrative that pops up, and we caution the candidate about that. Said you've gotten some good references, but this has been brought up. and it'll probably be brought up by either the search committee or the board interviewing. So be prepared for answer that. And we try to coach them to make sure they answer that to their satisfaction and to the reality and the truth of that.
Yeah, no, that's definitely a great point that you bring in. And that brings in another thing that has been happening for quite some time now, which is back channeling, where people will have asked the candidate for references. And yet, once they, of course, they know from the resume and their LinkedIn profile and just an open search book, is that which company did they work for? People pull out the names of people. And if somebody knows, especially from the board or even the C-suite, the fellow C-suite peers, if they know someone, they will call people who are not the references.
Yeah.
So sometimes a lot of my executive clients will come and say that I'm asked questions that just taking me by surprise. So what would you tell? I mean, this is a reality. It happens.
Sure.
So
Yeah.
how would you advise a CEO to go about it?
Just be prepared. I mean, they know what's out there. We always encourage, a lot of times people, Divya, will talk to us 2, 3, 5 years before they ever make a move. They call us because they've seen something or seen a podcast. And we encourage them to be active on LinkedIn, get their name out there. Take positions on things, publish, short articles so people understand their positions on things. Get their name out there so their name's noticeable. And the more your name's noticed out there, it helps the person that's hiring you understand about you. But at the same time, you develop people that may become your mentor or may start to follow you and say, I'm very interested in what you're doing. And a part of your career growth is getting to know these people that you connect with on LinkedIn or on the internet. So I think that's a very important point. Make sure their name's out there. And if they're taking positions on things, publishing articles, we always encourage that, because at the same time, knowing that your position's being looked at, talked to, and then look at the feedback on LinkedIn. People may say, I liked your article, or have you thought about this point, and learn from it.
Mm-hmm. And besides being out there on the web, because as you have mentioned, that social media presence is essential, getting your name out there is there. What other strategies would you recommend CEOs who are potentially looking to make that next career move?
Well, making sure that they're moving for the right reason. And that could be whether it's family, whether it's personal growth, making sure they want to move to advance in their career, not take a step back. They could be looking at their last career in their and before they retire, and that's a different situation. But when you're looking to make the right moves, make sure it's right for you, make sure it's right for your family. And we always say that to a new CEO, 90% of the time should be dedicated to your job, but don't give 100% to your new job. And people say, why would you say that? Keep 10% for yourself. Self-growth, learning for yourself, for your family. Don't lose the support of your family during this critical career move. So.
Mm-hmm. And if someone is interested, you mentioned that several executives reach out to you even 2 to 3 years before they're making that move. How can they connect with you?
Sure. I'm on LinkedIn. Neill Marshall's on LinkedIn. It's just Kurt Mosley on LinkedIn, Neill Marshall on LinkedIn. Go to our website. It's www.healthsearchpartners.com. On our website is all of our podcasts, all of our articles that we wrote. We just did a great summary of the recent American College of Healthcare Executives annual conference and what our takeaway was. We interviewed over 60 different candidates there and put together a nice synopsis. It's on there. So there's a lot of good information on there, and contact us directly through our website. Our names are on there, and our LinkedIn, or not LinkedIn, but our accounts are there, so they can get a hold of us.
Absolutely. And as we are bringing the show to a close, you mentioned that you just recently interviewed 60. So any fresh trends or any fresh advice that you'd like to share with our audience?
Yeah, so, thanks for allowing me to answer that. healthcare is changing. I was just, I'm a speaker for our company. I do some speeches across the country, and somebody asked me last week, said, summarize the ACHE meeting for me. And they said, give us the next 6 months. And I said, excuse me. I said, I don't know the next 6 days in healthcare. It's changing every day. So be prepared for change, and a lot of it. Be prepared for AI being a big part of healthcare going forward. But one of the CEOs told me, Divya, which I really enjoyed, he said, Kurt, I use AI, but he goes, we can't forget that with artificial intelligence, we need emotional intelligence to go with that. Mm-hmm. And that's very important. And obviously, with all the changes, the one big beautiful bill, there's a lot of financial pressure on hospitals, and they have to be financially viable to take care of our patient population, which is their key. And that's another factor you need to look at it. Somebody said to me to give us another one-liner, and I said, we don't have to do better with less. We have to do better. We have to do more with less. So again, it's one of those things that healthcare is being graded nowadays, and there's a lot of patient satisfaction scores, and that's how doctors are paid, hospitals are paid on readmittance. So that's been a big factor, especially we looked at for cost-cutting measures. So that's a quick 3-line summary I could give you on that.
Absolutely. And anything else you'd like to share with our audience?
Well, just the first 90 days is really, we look at it as really the key for your legacy. And it's that earned authority in that first 90 days that you get during that time that really is the roadmap and the key to your success for your whole career. And that's your legacy. So make sure that first 90 days, you understand it, you work with it, you're open to it. And most importantly, you understand that you're on stage at all times, no matter what you do, whether you're in the hospital, whether you're in town, whether you're at a public event. So just remember that.
Mm-hmm. Very powerful.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us, Kurt, and sharing so openly. And thank you, wonderful audience, for being with us and being part of our family. Because without you, the show would not be possible. Reach out to us like you always do. Let us know how we can serve and support you to help you live the best life you deserve. And thank you, Juan, our tech genius. Be well and take care until next time.
Great.
Thank you for being part of Beyond Confidence with your host, Divya Parekh. We hope you have learned more about how to start living the life you want. Each week on Beyond Confidence, you hear stories of real people who have experienced growth by overcoming their fears and building meaningful relationships. During Beyond Confidence, Divya Parekh shares what happened to her when she stepped out of her comfort zone to work directly with people across the globe. She not only coaches people how to form heart connections, but also transform relationships to mutually beneficial partnerships as they strive to live the life they want. If you are ready to live the life you want and leverage your strengths, learn more at www.divyaparekh.com. And you can connect with Divya at contact@divyaparekh.com. We look forward to you joining us next week.